Preparation. You know, she's still.
All right. Welcome, everyone. Happy to have you all here. If you didn't have a chance to grab snacks, water, sign in, or the additional sort of resources that we have over there, feel free to do so. As you know, Nate here with Hertz Eastman. Before we jump in, just wanted to give a chance to my teammates who are here tonight to introduce themselves, some of the new faces. So,
hi everyone, I'm Nazra. I'm an architect specializing in schools. Been working on this project with us since last year, so excited to come back in.
John Bergman, I'm also with Organization as well. In Chicago, so I've been serious till date, and that's where I have, of course, you guys here.
yeah, so happy to have them and some additional building experts in the room tonight as we dig into facilities. And hopefully y'all have had a chance. I know we did send this out. I realized my clicker is not working ahead of time, so just trying to give you as much as possible so that we can get into the small group work a little earlier. As some of y'all know who have been to the regional meetings, a little more interactive, so not as much of a discussion tonight, but more of a hands-on activity. So I would say it is more fun and a little more engaging in that sense. So excited to get there. In the meantime, wanting to just go through those sort of other items at the top. So starting with the administrative piece, those new resources that are there, the big spreadsheet that you have, which is the 11 by 17. So that is all the data that is in the exploration tool. If you've hopefully seen that, it's on the project website on that table on the left, but that allows you to look up any school in the district, see what its utilization is, enrollment, building composite score, basically all the columns that are on that spreadsheet shown by each school. What this does is just give you all that information in one place. And we have also added the Google Sheets version of that to the Google Drive so that if you want to filter, manipulate, search by school type, or by region, or by construction year, which is one that's on there, you can do so. We've also added the annual utility report if you'd like to see which buildings are consuming more energy than others. Definitely another valuable metric to take into consideration. And then lastly, the budget preparation guide. So this is something that back at that enrollment and budget meeting, Nick Syndrome had spoken to. There's like a 17-page document that gets handed to principals in terms of how they shape their budget and what considerations are. So a lot of information in there, and that is available to you all as well. So want to make sure, and as always, if you're having any access issues with the Google Drive, please let us know. We want to make sure that you can reach those. Providing just a regional feedback summary. So before I dig into this, just wanting to highlight a slightly different. I know that obviously in the citywide community, steering committee, we've been looking at across all regions and from a district-wide perspective, but just not wanting to look in isolation as much. So this is kind of the feedback that we've heard across all regions. You can see the response by region over there on the right. So 32 responses since the last meeting to that form. And some of the questions that we, or topics and questions that we've gotten. So starting with topics is about resource consolidation and allocation, just as we do that using really clear, transparent metrics. So just to pause for a second there, I want to highlight that I know we've been sort of on the journey with the shared base of foundational knowledge and understanding, and we are going to be shifting more into strategies and prioritization in the next meeting, as well as, the activity tonight is really about prioritization and how do we think through that specifically as well. So we are going to be moving towards that with the intent of, coming up with some really clear scenarios to get feedback on in the fall as people return. And we want to sort of build that plan with you all as well. But as we go into June, we will do that. One quick additional note on the June meetings, there'll be an email coming out about this as well, but we know that the first and second week of June are challenging time of year, with the last week of school being the second week of June. So what we're, just because, and this is a spoiler alert at the very end, like what we're talking about the next meeting is peer district strategies, so what other districts are doing to face some of those challenges, and then also sort of a recap on some of the strategies we've been looking at as part of this project. It's really shifting into that mindset. It is going to be less regionally specific, and we know, that people's schedules are going to be busy. So we're going to have 3 options for June meetings, basically the first week of June, Tuesday, Wednesday, or Thursday night, and just allow people to pick whichever day works best for their schedule and just attend one of those meetings. So we'll still be in person, but we just wanted to create some flexibility and not ask people to come in, on that during that last week of school when there are a lot of graduations and other things happening. So hopefully that's helpful. Other topics that have come up were school start times. I know this is something we discussed a lot with transportation. So definitely something we want to, factor in as a data point to look at. Questions. So details about right sizing, like we were just talking about, kind of that timeline piece, and when we're ready to share with the public, knowing that engagement over the summer can be challenging, and that when we hit the ground running in the fall, we want to have something for people to react to, right? Like not so much of the, how do you feel about X? And what about hypothetically Y? So really having some scenarios in place. And then finally shifting into sort of those, meeting specific questions that we drafted, that you all drafted and sort of submitted through your sheet, through the survey. But specialty programs in MPS schools, the feedback we heard, were just about potentially expanding some programs. Definitely heard about AP, arts, Montessori, and tutoring. And then finally, I know this was a conversation at a number of the committee meetings, but how can we expand specialty programs to be available at more schools and maybe less of a standalone item? So integrating world languages to every school to try to sort of lift up the offerings there. So that's something that came up. The next few questions were about transportation, which we had some interesting data. So again, this is a small sample size, right? 29 people who responded to these questions. The first one just showing how important is MPS transportation when choosing a school. Kind of an even split here, with blue being very important, red being somewhat important, yellow being not important. The bottom one, we had a much stronger response to one answer. So this question was, hypothetically, if your child's school stopped offering bus service or MPS transportation, what would you most likely do? And the overwhelming response was that people would keep their child at the current school and find a non-MPS form of transportation to use. The other options being shift to another MPS school that still offers transportation, or switch to a quote unquote like better MPS school fit that also doesn't offer transportation, but maybe, since that's no longer a variable. We realize, these questions have shortcomings as well in terms of families that may shift to go outside the district altogether, but it at least gives us some interesting content to think about for future engagement and what might inform people's decision making. So planting seeds there. Definitely want to make sure we collect questions at the end here from you all about facilities engagement questions and what we can potentially learn. So the landscape analysis, you'll also see, I know some of you all showed up a little early today just to run through this. So hopefully you've had a chance to review it. I'm going to move really quickly, but if you have clarifying questions, please do stop me. We can touch on that. So just touching on age of MPS school buildings, quite old, 83 years on average, give or take, and then 85% of them being built before 1970. National averages about 50 years, so younger, but still quite old, and how little work has been done on average to public school buildings across the US, both in replacement renovations and significant upgrades. Air conditioning, so this is just digging into like different building features, but knowing that more than half of MPS school buildings have some degree, only 26% of classrooms though that are actually air conditioned across the district. This is highlighting climate shifts in Milwaukee. Happy to explain this graph if it's super interesting to people, but basically what we're showing is just that as the years go on from 2025 down to 2080, and this is Milwaukee specific, we have our internal sustainability team spin these graphs up, but just showing that there is going to be a greater need for air conditioning and thermal comfort control within buildings. So that's that bottom graph, just seeing sort of expanding red. There is a need for AC and bleeding outside of just summer months. From there, just a national glance at air conditioning and sort of those rising needs. So you'll see that Milwaukee, or not just Milwaukee, but Wisconsin is not necessarily in the orange to show the increasing need. And that is just by this metric here, which is 32 school days above 80 degrees outdoor air temperatures, which I think there's room for discussion whether that is the right metric, but it is just showing that there is a vastly growing sort of need for greater thermal comfort control across many districts that will come at a very high dollar amount. Accessibility being a big one, so highlighting that the majority of MPS schools are wheelchair accessible, noting that accessibility is more than just getting in the building, but there are a lot of barriers that do exist just from the pathway to the parking lot into the building. That is kind of the first and biggest step, but there is nuance to accessibility once you are in a building, being able to get to multiple floors, use restrooms that are outfit correctly, getting on stages and whatnot. So a lot to take into consideration there. Not a problem with new construction, but with existing buildings, looking at the districts that were surveyed, almost 1 in 5 districts had at least one school where there was a building that students couldn't attend if there were accessibility issues. So certainly a widespread challenge. Safety and security. So this is specifically looking at building safety and security and different sort of metrics there, and what's changed over that 10-year period since 09 and 10 to 21, 22. Security cameras have jumped, just noting that the classroom door locks wasn't measured in the first go, which is why it jumps from like 0 to 70. We also want to highlight, while perimeter security and physical security features are important, it's that balance of not creating a bunker as well. And from the CDC Youth Risk Behavior Survey, noting that the biggest safety concerns flagged by students at that time were actually related to bullying and mental health, which you see on the left side of the chart here, and at the far right is where weapons fall. So not to say they're not all important, but it's really, we just want to emphasize the importance of a balanced approach to safety and security, like passive visibility into classrooms and being able to see what's going on. So I'm really thinking about all those characteristics. Lead exposure. So we know that there's a lot of information out there right now available related to the lead exposure risk. Just highlighting some key details with the 9 schools that have been identified with actionable levels, some that have already reopened from the temporary closures, and then the MPS lead action plan that was released, calling for 54 schools to be inspected before the end of the or before the start of next school year, and another 52 before the end of the calendar year. Knowing that this problem goes beyond MPS, right? Like this is a larger issue in the city of Milwaukee, almost 90% of residential homes likely having lead paint, and just the exorbitant costs that come along with that and what funding would be needed and is available. There are other districts that are facing similar challenges. The Journal Sentinel put out a great article sort of highlighting some of those that we were going to touch on. CPS was dealing with that a couple summers ago in 80 of its buildings, and New York has 330 buildings that were identified. Obviously, it's a district with well over 1,000 buildings, so certainly a different magnitude, but a challenge that they are also facing. And then finally, just to touch on this one, I think this is the most interesting component, but in 2017, the GAO survey showed, looked at surveyed schools that had buildings pre-1978, so that would presumably have lead present in some of their buildings, and almost 90% of them either did not inspect for lead that year or didn't know if they had. And of the 12% that reported that they did inspect, half of them found lead in at least some of their schools. And of those surveyed, only 6% had a recurring schedule for lead inspection. So just a big challenge of the unknown for a lot of districts across the US. Going back to kind of the why, so just the impact that facility quality has on student outcomes and communities and everything else. I think we could spend an entire meeting on this, but want to at least bring it up. So there's a few really great sort of resources here that are again linked in the bottom right, but an MPS study actually from 2001 about correlations between facility conditions and student test scores. Harvard School of Public Health put out a meta-analysis looking at the impacts of healthy buildings on students. And then finally is a large research report that our firm actually did with the Drexel School of Education, looking at modernized schools in DC public schools and Baltimore City public schools, and the differences between modernized and non-modernized buildings. So great resources, highly recommend. Moving on to finance, just thinking about the money component, which is a big challenge when thinking about trying to do facility improvements or facility work. So noting that, about 1 in every $5 of MPS's revenue is coming from federal funding. This is the MPS budget. On the far right, you can see the sort of 24-25 budget that is about 1.5 billion. And this is one that we really wanted to highlight, is just some of the differences in averages in terms of what percent of the budget is going to facilities work specifically. So on the left here, you're seeing operations and maintenance, just those ongoing sort of recurring costs to maintain buildings. So MPS is in blue here, state of Wisconsin in yellow, and the national average in green. So a significant difference on the first one, but not quite as significant on the second one, which is capital expenditures, or like capital funding being for school construction, major renovations, et cetera. That's where you really see, the 1.3% compared to the 10 and above percent on average elsewhere. So just thinking about the age of the buildings and some of the challenges that are faced in relation to that, kind of where that's all stemming from. Looking at comparatively how funding is set up across the US state by state. So Wisconsin being one of 12 states that does not provide capital funding related to school facilities for local districts, and putting that responsibility on the local communities to handle. And then finally, just some trends related to capital funding. So the chart on the right is showing the pursuit, of school bond funding nationwide. So you'll see that increase of about 40% from 23 to 24, which is not uncommon to see a spike during a presidential election year. More people are generally voting, but you do see the last few years there's been a rise as sort of COVID and ESSER funding starts to wind down, and there's a greater need for funding in schools. Looking more local, in the April election in Wisconsin, there were 31 school bond pursuits, and 21 of them passed. And then just noting that MPS has not pursued a school bond referendum since 1993, which was for 366 million, 815 million in today dollars, which was rejected, 75% of voters voting no. So just highlighting some of the important historical details here. All right, move through that quickly. Any questions specific to any of that? Yeah.
I think that I know the answer, but with no state funding, like, is there any capital funding at all outside of going to referendum? Like, can you set aside operational dollars for capital purposes in your budgeting if you determine that state's not funding it and going to referendum is impractical?
Short answer, yes. But Michelle, did you want to?
That is, short answer.
Thank you.
So
To clarify that, go even further, are you using operational money or are you borrowing money for capital projects? And if so, what's the percentage of your budget that goes to paying off the debt?
So as of right now, work that we're doing like right now, it's just not an application budget. So we're to go out for some sort of borrowing component between that. I'll be honest, of my pay grade as to how that would work or look, but I know the district has done it in the past. So, but get a little bit more.
Okay, thank you.
any other questions? Happy to come back to it later if need be. So just looking at the district versus regional analysis, we have sort of broken out some details by region here. So this is that same graph that we had shown earlier on, just by region, to show original construction year and how many buildings were constructed by decade here. So you'll see the spikes sort of, especially in the 50s through the 70s, and then also sort of a lot of central region schools being built in those 1910s through the 30s. We also think building additions are really important to consider when talking about construction. And obviously have a major change from what was originally constructed. So this is only showing count, and it's important to note that not all building additions are equally sized. Adding 3 classrooms and adding 16 classrooms are very different. But just seeing when the construction was happening, we wanted to at least provide that highlight and by what region. From there, looking at facility condition index. So FCI is just talking about deferred maintenance costs over the replacement value of the building. To try to understand, the sort of quality of the building through this lens. You'll note that that is not included on the spreadsheet that we passed out. We have the composite building score, which is actually a combination of FCI, and then it factors in air conditioning status and like the percentage of classrooms that are air conditioned, as well as EUI, the energy use intensity, so how much energy is consumed by a building year over year. The reason for doing that is FCI can be sort of thrown off when you have some buildings that are air conditioned and some that are not. Buildings that have air conditioning systems tend to look like they have worse FCI scores because they're higher costs for replacement, and deferred maintenance costs tend to be higher because built HVAC systems are expensive. So creating that composite score was a way to try to balance that out, knowing that air conditioning is a very valuable feature in buildings in the district. So yeah.
So a higher number better, lower number, I mean.
Higher number better.
Higher.
And what did you say the top number was? The highest number for the composite?
10.
10.
1 to 10. Yep. And then also just noting FCI doesn't take into account FF&E, which is like furniture, fixtures, equipment, so technology, other unique building sort of components. Yeah.
Hey,
Please.
your condition index for maintenance, is that based on the maintenance that MPS facilities keep, or is there?
Yes, this is based on MPS facilities data. Yep. Good
And
point.
then the other question I was gonna ask, is there any metric and buildings to evaluate their educational readiness, like how well do they support district overall education?
Like educational adequacy. Yeah, so the short answer is sort of yes, right? Like we did, as part of this effort, you'll see on one of the next charts, we did do site evaluations. It wasn't like a comprehensive EA survey, but we did try to fill in some gaps that we saw. So for example, in one of the cards in the activity you'll see tonight is like purpose-built specialist classroom. So, that is to say we have a science room, or we have a science room that actually has sinks and actually has, a fume hood and burners, or saying this is my art room. Does it have a sink? Does it have a kiln? Or is it shoved into a room that used to be language arts and now it's, or a former teacher's lounge or something. So there were some gaps that we tried to fill in there, which is more related to EA, but I wouldn't say that it's a fully, but that is another, metric that we include. Yeah. Great question. Outdoor amenities. So this being one of the things that doing those site evaluations, we wanted to capture, knowing the outdoor space that's available is great, but there is a big difference between having softball field and a big, blacktop. So you'll see just across the board here by region, where playgrounds exist, basketball courts, and these are all outdoors. So, and then you can see some differences. So like tennis courts, soccer, softball, some of the spikes that are happening in the Southwest region. So really just highlighting that this is another consideration as we start to think about prioritizing, like, where does this fit? And how do we make sure that if we're investing in a building, that it's one that's going to support the correct programming for that long-term sort of vision. Utilization is one, obviously, we talk about a lot. So that's just enrollment over capacity. Again, and just to speak to it, when we talk about capacity, we're talking about programming capacity, not the amount of people that can safely fit in a building by the fire department standards. So those are different metrics and wanting to highlight that. And we've talked about how about a quarter of the district is over capacity, about a quarter is very far below it. And you can see it by school type here, with middle schools being sort of the lowest on average, knowing that there's a small number of traditional middle schools in the district. So we broke that out by region as well. And this just shows that same chart. And I think it's a little easier to see on the next slide, where we have, you know, sort of that similar donut chart for each region. But you'll see that like the central region has a greater percentage of its schools that are in that very low, which is below at or below 50% utilization. Southwest having about half of their schools that are in the high category, which is at or above 101%. So, you know, we understand that those are like, these are thresholds that maybe aren't the right numbers, right? Like, so this is also feedback we want to get from you all. If this doesn't feel like, you know, these are how we should be looking at it, this is all information to chew on. Northwest, you can see, is mostly following into the low, and then the East region sort of representing how the district looks broadly. So the same division there. Finally,
Can you
please, I'm sorry.
explain, can you explain utilization rate again? And
Yeah.
you said it's that number of students. What
So
is that?
it's enrollment, the number of students that are enrolled over the capacity of the building.
Gotcha.
And just when talking about the capacity, so from a programmatic standpoint, for example, you might have 10 classrooms in a building. If each classroom can fit 30 kids, that's a capacity of 300. But let's say, no, actually one of these classrooms is a parent resource room, or, you know, let's say it's a special education classroom that actually can't fit 30 kids. It only maxes out at 12 kids. Now that capacity is dropped down. It's not due to the square footage of the room, it's due to how it's programmed. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Like, okay, because I think it's a really important distinction. So that's something, you know, as PS thinks about having dedicated, you know, art rooms, science rooms, music rooms, that factors in, but then principals can kind of decide if they don't want that to be that room, and maybe we'll add more students, and like that's where it starts to get a little messy. When thinking about going well over capacity, like how are they fitting the kids in there? It's because maybe they didn't opt to use that room for a parent resource room. Maybe now it's another grade classroom or something like that. That's where some of the challenges come in.
And you were just saying, you know, maybe these aren't right, but like, you're getting paid to do this, and I just want to make sure, like, other districts have used these as
Yeah.
their qualifiers for how they maintain and how they plan to do
Yes,
long range facility.
I appreciate you pointing that out. Yeah. We believe these are
You're
correct.
better than we are. at
Yes,
doing
we
that.
believe that it's correct, but if you say 101, like that's just barely, you know, I would say generally the sweet spot, again, for utilization is not 100%, because there's no room for give and take, right? Like you don't want to be there. So you want to be a little bit beneath it. More so to say, like, don't assume that this is all carved in stone and, well, we're at 101, so, you know, we fell on the wrong side of that fence. But yeah, I appreciate pointing that out.
On the spreadsheet.
Yep.
And can you tell me more what site-specific evaluation of alternative options means?
Yes, so I don't have the sort of preliminary sorting tree in front of me, but it basically means, if I remember correctly, how it ends up into that category is that we need to do an additional evaluation, that the data wasn't quite as clear. So some of the examples would be, you know, like if a school sort of was ready to fall into a building expansion category, right? Like it's big enough, it needs more space for the kids, but then we looked at the actual site and there's no room to expand. So clearly an expansion is not a viable solution there, even if we wanted to and have the money and wanted to spend it. So needing to look at like maybe a more policy-based approach to address some of the challenges of that building. So that is only to say that it's, you know, the candidate group that it would be falling in. So that it may end up in one of the other groups. It's just not going to be purely sorted on the data. Hopefully that makes sense. Yeah. Lose my clicky. Yep, sure did. All right. Let me jump over here. Let's get it back. Zoom crashed. All right, so hopefully that pops back.
What's going on?
Technical difficulties. All right, forgive me. Just a second, if you want to, yeah, Good. So it'll take me 1 second to.
So that utilization is enrollment divided by capacity, and you come up with a percentage, is that what he's talking about? Okay. So. And the capacity would be the actual number of bodies that
That would
is.
be.
So, but when he said programming, how does programming fit into that? That's the part where I'm confused.
Oh, see that? Okay. Oh, great.
Someone just set it aside. Something. That doesn't have, that may go into that. They don't use that room.
All right. But thank you for your patience. Sorry about that. So the next one we're looking at is, and this is the final graph, but just some scatter plots, which are not always the easiest graphs to read. So we did put just sort of a quick explainer here of what you're looking at. So all the dots on the graph to the right, which is an example, it'll be on the next slide as well, are different schools. The different colors represent the 4 different regions geographically. And what we're trying to show here is just the x-axis, the horizontal axis is enrollment of the school, and the y-axis is the square footage, so the size of the building from a square footage perspective. And that line that you see going through it is the amount of square footage sort of recommended per student. So if you're looking at elementary schools, the recommendation that we're looking at is 150 square feet per student on average. So using that line as a metric, you would know that the schools that are above the line have more than, at least, or more than 150 square feet per student. The schools that are below it are less than that. So in theory, would be more crowded. It's important to note that these benchmarks are, general best practices. It is a range. There is no nationally recognized standard for what the square footage per student should be. But we looked at, sort of Minnesota has some guidelines and some Wisconsin projects that sort of inform that. So yeah.
When you use that number at 150 square per student,
Mhm.
is that based on enrollment or on capacity?
That is based on 150 square foot per student is like, if we're building a new school, how big do we want to make it? Like, this is the idealized sort of how much space there should be per kid from a capacity. So this is looking at it based on enrollment, so showing what is actually there.
Gotcha.
But if you're talking about constructing a new building, right, like you'd want to do it on that programmatic capacity. So like, if we're building a school that we want to fit 500 students, we'd want to make sure that there was at least enough space for 150 square feet per kid.
So a building that is underutilized will tend to be higher on this.
Correct. The buildings that are underutilized are probably the ones that are pretty far away from the line. Yeah, it's a great question. So, and 150 square foot is for elementary students, middle school, 180 square feet, and then 230 square feet for high school students. There isn't like a hard and fast rule for K-8, so we're showing both elementary and middle. So jumping through those, this is the elementary schools. You can see sort of how they're spread out here. And to give an example, like this is a school that is, has one of the lower enrollments. It is not the biggest school, but it is larger than, a good chunk of them. So just seeing that could be something to look at. And then you've got one that's sort of hanging out up here as well. Very large building. Even though it's got a higher enrollment of 400 or something, it's a 200,000 square foot building. Middle schools, K-8's next, forgive me. So you'll see the black line is representing that 150 square feet per student. The blue line is 180. And the K-8 schools, you'll see sort of the biggest spread of, depending on which line you think is correct. And again, this is a range. So as you shift that, it could move around. You'll see a lot of Southwest K-8s that are in there. More of the central and east K-8s that are on this end of that spectrum. So it's just an interesting way to start looking at that data. Middle schools, knowing that there are not a lot of traditional middle schools in the district and they have lower utilization on average, it's not a surprise to see them all well above that sort of trend line. And then finally, high schools, which vary in size the most in general. So you'll see that they're scattered around more. Maybe some of the specialty or alternative ed schools down there when you consider like a Project Stay and some of the bigger schools, closer to the top of the graph, spread out. So, just wanting to give that, lens or everything. Any questions before we move on?
One question about, that I'm not seeing any data on it, is building condition. So, I see on the graph that we have the age of construction.
Yeah.
But is there a measure that says, okay, you know, on a scale of 1 to 100, this building is functioning at, say, 80%. It's had new windows, it's had a new furnace, it's had asbestos removal. Is there something that
So,
includes that?
yeah, great question. The building composite score is gonna be measuring the like quality of the facility.
Well, okay,
And so that factors in, I think it is 50% of it is of the score. And I know this gets a little messy, but is the FCI. So that facility condition index takes into
I
consideration
see.
work
Got it.
that's been done,
Okay.
any upgrades, renovations, et cetera,
Okay, great.
deferred maintenance that has been addressed.
Okay.
And then, so that is your best sort of metric that's on that sheet that is about facility quality
Thank
from a pure building standpoint.
And
Yep.
just on that same point, like, since there's virtually no money being spent on capital improvements, those are a point in time viewpoint, but they're probably gonna stand in the same place rather than get materially better or different moving forward.
There are deferred maintenance projects that are happening year over year, so they do shift, and then also the list grows, right? Like it shifts in both directions. But yeah,
But there just is not a lot of capital money being spent
Right.
overall, so.
broadly speaking,
Across the spectrum, not gonna be a lot of movement over the
Right.
near future.
Yeah. I would agree. No, please.
And on capital spending, I did send you an email about this.
Yep.
Is this, are the decisions made on what capital projects to undertake at the enterprise level by the board and the superintendent, or advice to the superintendent? Or are individual schools and their principals and the administrative staff deciding?
So,
And, yeah, I guess that's the question.
yeah, capital projects, and Michelle can speak to it, but those are determined centrally, with the exception of, you know, fundraising projects that happen. I don't know, Michelle, if you wanna.
Yeah, I mean, we have, some schools are able to take on and support the cost of switching the building. You'll find most of those are gonna be more aesthetic type projects, like improving the library, or refreshing the space, adding lockers or something like that, versus the projects that are gonna be more maintenance. Replacing air handling unit or, you know, some doors that are exterior doors.
The windows.
When a school owns their own project, that comes out of their operational expenses and it's not separate cap.
Yeah. That changes.
And the tracking of those projects, where are those kept in the system? So if you looked at a building and you wanted to know, you know, how old it was, when the HVAC was replaced, when it last had new windows, when it had carpeting, who maintains that information?
So we do have a work order system,
Okay.
and it does track assets, not all of the assets that you mentioned there. So it tracks, and an asset would be like an air handling unit or say the roof system. So we do track like 44 different assets, building components. And so within that system, so it's an internal system that we use to kind of track those. And we generally identify like when it was installed and use that as mechanism and also trigger a deferred maintenance list. That
Okay.
deferred maintenance list is presented to the board.
Okay, great.
Per year. So, and then in terms of some of the smaller ones, like carpet replacement, that those are a little bit trickier because, you know, flooring gets replaced, all replaced. So at this moment, I would say we're talking 2044 big building components.
At a centralized.
It's
Okay.
Would that be things like, what about things that are important, but they're not like carpet, like screens and the the cameras and the wiring and stuff like that, does that go into your system or is that?
At this point, those types of, building components aren't in our system. So yes, we're not tracking at that level. And there are like cameras and that, they're actually digital devices, they're actually track those. But our department of technology, they're the ones that kind of.
So is there would you be able to say, this many schools still don't have screens and identify what schools those are?
Oh, you mean like.
When you say. screen,
Yeah,
you mean
window
like
screens,
this?
I'm talking window
Oh,
screens.
window screens.
We should be able to, and I know we have most buildings have screens and there's a handful that didn't and we're still catching up.
I just asked because it helps kind of fill in some blanks in terms of conditions of schools for people who want to know.
Would that be tracked under your policy or technology tracking or? Yeah, and I think what she's asking is, do we have a budgeting system someplace? So at this point, we haven't really integrated it into.
Typically technology as well, like security cameras and things like that is tracked. Districts will often track that like through their IT department, unless so facilities. So they're handling that.
Just to follow up on that,
Yeah.
Nate,
Please.
I'm wondering, is it possible to provide like some background in what goes into that building conditions index or just?
The building
people
closet score?
can dig deeper into how that score was developed. I think that would help. I know there's gonna be holes and things that aren't as complete as others, but just understanding what makes that up probably.
Yeah, and just high level and happy to provide this as a follow-up, but it's 50%, like I'm 99% sure, or to add all the percentages, but 50% FCI, and then 25% of it is scoring for air conditioning in classrooms and the energy use intensity, so how much a building, how much
And
energy.
just to further explain that,
Yeah.
FCI is the total value of the deferred maintenance that's being tracked by facilities.
Correct.
Over the cost of the expected cost of replacing the entire building.
That's correct.
Will part of the study look into like adaptive reuse potential for some of the buildings, like looking at, like, you know, if we're talking about potential consolidation, do they have potential to be repurposed to something else? Do they have the building characteristics or viability to be used in another way?
Yeah, short answer, definitely. It's something we think is a really important consideration, especially if you're looking at, you know, a potential school closure in a neighborhood where that might be the only community space, green space that exists there, making sure that that doesn't disappear. The reality also to speak to it is, you know, the state statute, if you're not familiar, it's on the one pager for facilities. If you look at the digital version, the supplementary resources has the state statute. But there are 4 Class A districts in the state of Wisconsin, which means they're above a certain size by enrollment, aka it's only MPS. There's a requirement that if they were to close a school, and keep me honest here, MPS, I want to make sure I'm saying it correctly, they have to offer it to other educational organizations for a period of 2 years before they can do anything like reuse or redevelopment or anything like that. So create some challenges and
One final question for Michelle. The tracking of these elements of the building, is that done with specific software made for facilities? Or is it like a spreadsheet?
No, it's not a spreadsheet.
Okay, okay.
Thank goodness. No, we use Asset Works.
Asset Works. Okay, great. Thank you.
I think it's a quick question. So on the spreadsheet, it looks like there's only 13 of the schools that have been rated to basically ongoing monitoring and evaluation. So I'm just wondering, like, is that because you were thinking about the financial pot and thinking we might be able to raise this much capital, so therefore this is how we put spread around, or like, I guess maybe the question is, what is the bar for saying, okay, this school is doing all right, they don't need any programming investments and they don't need any building investments?
Yeah, it's a great question. So I'll be sure to reshare some of the resources that we had from earlier on. We will be going into those more in depth next meeting too, to make
Okay.
sure that we've like explained all this. And it has been shared, so happy to provide those resources again, but that preliminary sorting tree, it's worth highlighting again and again, just that these are initial sorting groups, right? Like preliminary being a keyword there. So driven by data, the ongoing monitoring and evaluation group was determined based on like, you're at a relatively healthy utilization. Your building condition is relatively good. Your programmatic offerings are relatively sound. So an intervention isn't necessarily like an immediate need. Whereas a school,
Measurement for what good looks like.
what healthy operation looks like, yeah. So that is an initial measurement, right? Like you may think, oh, this school actually doesn't belong on that list because it actually needs X, Y, Z, which wasn't tracked by these data points, or maybe some other schools that should be on that list and aren't. And that's where anytime you're dealing with those specific thresholds, I think you're going to have ones that are on the fence.
Sure.
Yep. So I want to make sure we take some time to break out. So just to quickly speak to this and you know, just a reminder, accepting non-closure, equity of voice, some of the other norms and expectations that we set early on. So please keep those in mind. But just to explain the activity, so for the folks who are on the regional committees, if you are sitting at a table with somebody who's in your region, I would encourage you to shake it up. Just so we have some varied perspectives there, but what we have developed is like a game board here. So we've got these big printed out in the back, and we'll have one for each table. But what we're asking is looking at a bunch of different physical building features and ranking them in order of importance. So the way that we've set this up is this first like blue 3 lines here is sort of at the far end, the most important tier. Our thinking was that these first 3 would be sort of all the same importance. If you want to sub rank within them, you're welcome to do that. We certainly are all for flexibility in the game. But the challenge is of the 20-ish cards, all of them could be arguably important, hence the difficulty of the game. In trying to work with your table to come up with a consensus on if we're talking about a high quality facility, what are those most important features? And like, what is that hierarchy of like, we need to start with X. To be clear, we are not saying that anything is definitively not important, but we just want to understand the most important features. And we have done a similar activity like this if you were at some of the earlier engagement in the project, but that sort of included non-facility features like after-school programming or specialty programming. And this is really wanting you to think about the building. So for example, when we talk about safety, like a safe and secure campus, that is not to say all the staff members close the door after they walk in, they don't prop stuff open. There's ample security guards, things like that. We're specifically talking about the built sort of learning environment. So that physical structure, and we'll be supporting each table to try to help clarify any cards that aren't, as understandable. So hopefully that makes sense. And the folks who are regional can help explain the process too, because we have worked through this. And then we just kind of want to frame this in like, what are those realistic goals for MPS over the next 10 years? So when we're thinking about where we want MPS to be in the next 10 years and what, buildings the district should be investing in, we want to hear that too. And like, hopefully this game can help be a start of a reflection to that. Also voicing, please embrace the non-permanents, like as you work through them, if you want to change your answers and move them around, please do so. And then finally, policy changes that might help sort of ease the path towards that vision. We know that there are, as with every subject that we've kind of looked at, some policy considerations that need to be brought into play. So just keeping that at the back of your mind as well. Yeah, go ahead.
Is there difference between the 2 blue?
No, those are just highlighting that you would like drop a card there. It's just an example. So,
Oh,
yeah,
okay.
yeah. That's just.
And just in terms of the overall universe of building, I'd still look like 140 to 150, is that what?
144 campuses currently working, yeah. Better MPS buildings. And so campuses being like, if there are multiple buildings on a campus, in theory, we would just count that as one campus. All right, any questions before we jump in? Again, we'll be floating around.
Yeah,
And if
you're
you
right.
wanna switch
Oh, you're
seats,
going to a
like,
different table.
feel free to do so.
That was something
Yep.
that we said.
No,
Sure.
spend a lot of time working with Carlos, that's all.
Yep, I did.
You know where I'm at.
So you've done this already?
Yesterday.
All right,
And I did this last week.
No overlap. And other people
Well,
have other cards.
No, we all have the same card. The only thing is a different
yeah.
color.
yeah. One last note, we have some blank cards if there's something that's not there, or if you want to split up a card to clarify, like, this may be a higher priority for a high school than it is for an elementary school. Those are important distinctions, and yeah, you can sort of add spaces as necessary on the board.
So have you done
Just
this
a
yet?
thought, because I think this is like
You haven't
gonna be
played
the
the game?
bulk of the
Okay, have you
activity.
played
We
this
want
game
to
yet?
talk about
Okay,
questions
so
one
it's
and
just you and me.
three, because I worry that if we
I think
start with
can
this,
look at it
like,
and then
that's
like
gonna take up the whole time and
read them and then like.
it's just a thought passing through my head.
There's no problem. You don't get any questions, you just
Okay.
get-
And are we,
Okay.
is this the lowest
Definitely.
rank here?
Yeah.
So- And that's
I
the
actually had
highest,
some
so it's like, we're going.
It is important, so we
Yeah.
can.
for 10 or 15 years now and they.
I mean, we could move everybody
It's
this
nice.
way, right?
So,
Sure.
if I could grab all your attention, please. In the remaining time, I want to make sure tables have a chance to sort of share the thinking on their boards. So if you'd like to stand up and go take a look at some other folks' boards, and if maybe one or two people want to hang out and explain to others, you take some turns and float around in here and see how other people were perceiving those same features and levels of importance. So
Okay, any takers on who wants to stay here and explain? Okay, otherwise.
I'm curious.
Oh, you left.
So how does
Well,
their staff?
the idea was that ADA kind of hovers over everything.
It's the lens by which the ADA is the lens by which we see everything else.
It goes this way?
Everything else goes.
Okay.
This is the most important. This is most important.
Oh, that's.
Yeah, that's most important. This is this is like a magnifying.
And like, parking kind of like some, part of the wanted it here, part of it was, yeah, you know, he was very convincing. Canada, talking about, thinking about high school, especially.
Good, how you doing?
It's really.
I'm going to take off the school year real quick.
Right, Saturday and then we got the ADA.
Yeah, 2 weeks. 2 weeks from today.
Okay, well, that's sure.
You were here for the one in December.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
Actually,
I fly pretty much every time.
That one.
Pretty much every time.
Yeah,
And then,
crazy. We got another 300.
and of course, it's, I think he was talking about he has kids in a school.
Yeah, he said he has kids at McDowell, which used to be a high school, used to be Juneau, but the bathrooms hasn't changed, and but they still have like K3 students in there for the last 10 years.
They are, I'm from Milton, I remember.
So it's ADA part beyond that number one. Is that the bathroom?
Yeah, it's the lens by which we look at everything. It has to happen.
The doors are right here.
Right.
I'm walking to the
What are
bathroom.
the effective?
Yeah, they're like really low, and the kids nowadays are not that short anymore.
Better, very much like
All the way to the right on one, all the way to the
flexible
left on the
spaces,
other.
getting into 21st century learning, right? Flexible spaces, collapsible, build them up, outside
Or if
use.
there's like, if there's a basketball game and you got.
What is this?
Correct. So that was
Better staff.
Better staff.
It's a policy.
Everybody knows North Division is the one you gotta get.
I told them.
Oh,
Right. It now has 2-hour parking time. So.
They lived on that.
Yeah, some-
That would have been better top.
It was building, actually two buildings.
You all lumped categories together.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Once-
They were like.
That's it.
Same level of importance to them.
Of it,
Kind
of
come out
Snowfest?
and then-
Children.
Okay.
There's 600 kids. in there. That was more like one set.
What are safe restrooms?
And it was inequitable.
I think Paul.
I had a bathroom. And then there was two more adult.
We've got schools that have changed their.
Old buildings.
So like, I get drunk now.
Do you want to tag out somebody so they can float around? See the other one? Feel free.
Way to think about it. That's the way to put it.
It's too high for them to.
It's not just that, I would like 60% of all the fully.
Yeah, those are like 3-4 buildings.
And there's a way to build.
Only one thing about
So like a usable design.
So,
all
build
of
them
that
like
is
airport.
right, well, that, but also in its location.
Yeah.
The restaurants aren't down the hall at the other end.
Right.
They're right outside the office where you have view of what's happening,
In the
and what's
middle
going
and
on.
Do you want to see?
You can hear. Then people are fighting in there.
I'll look at the notes.
Be sure to photo.
you know, safe and secure buildings or whatever, but it's a valid, I think it's a very valid point. Restrooms specifically.
Yeah.
Rogers comment.
I think you mentioned, I brought up.
Yeah, I checked you out, but when I saw you.
Yeah.
I'm sure we can.
I mean, how many?
Yeah, you're right.
You're
But everybody else pretty much has the same. The same kind
So we do know each other.
Yes.
That's the lens.
But you when they clock the Twitter. Yeah.
Yeah.
Generally.
Flexible, non-classroom learning space, if you guys rank that higher than anyone else.
The one that.
What's he waving around the architecture?
Yeah.
For a new construction now, that has to follow. It depends. So they like, so the classroom learning time, like a car assembly, change. There's also like maximum distance.
I would say this.
How that.
All right, if people want to grab a seat, we'll wrap up.
I have 3 concerts in the last 24 hours.
Funny,
I know, like
contrast, depending on the
And first of all, they are have that one
Right here.
Like, good luck.
In the same spot as ours.
Yeah, otherwise.
Yeah. Okay.
Least
Yeah,
of us.
so generally, there's like way down the hall. Because they like.
Trying to get us that conversation.
They could be anybody. Yeah, so in general, if you have public assemblies, you'll know that you have people that are going to the gym, so you tell the kids use the gym one.
I would, I mean, I don't think anyone here talked about them at all, so.
There was.
Well, it wasn't sure they're all absolutely.
I would agree with you. That's like a good point.
Oh, yeah, that's what I'll do, yeah. I just saw.
Not that that's not all.
I just thought of them.
No.
Come on, just,
All good. I'm gonna talk about it right now.
Yeah.
All right, if folks don't mind grabbing the seats, we'll wrap up. Want to be respectful of the. Before we hit our time.
I
we
mean,
would
the
close
poor
it.
custodian that is. Very good conversation.
I know, I'm sorry to be the breaker of it. All right. So just a final note for tonight, really highlighting again for the Community Insights Forum. This is live right now if you want to scan the QR code if you haven't done it yet. Otherwise, on the next couple slides, we have the QR code for the May survey. We do read all that feedback. Please let us know if there are different ways to structure this. Again, we'll be sending out information just about the modifications in June to make sure that we are sort of out in front of that. If you have challenges with calendar invites or anything else, please reach out. We want to make sure you have the correct information, but please help us think about what to ask stakeholders about facilities. I know there's some responses on there already about trying to recreate a similar activity for a wider group. So thinking about how we can do that. And then just quickly on the May look ahead. So, or sorry, that should be May and it says June. Forgive me, but June look ahead. So looking at other districts, what they're doing to, sort of approaching some of the similar challenges that MPS is facing, how they're handling it, what some of the outcomes have been, and also just really digging back into the strategy that we had had developed as part of this project already, so that we can really hit the ground running in the strategic development, now having this foundational knowledge piece. So the last slide here, there it is. That's the QR code. So that has the link to the Poll Everywhere activity too, to suggest questions. If you want to scan that, and we'll be following up with the other information. Any final takeaways folks feel like they want to share? Just, I know there was a lot of good conversation going on. I'm sorry to have to interrupt it. Final thoughts or notes, anybody? Okay. Well, thank you again. We're happy to have you all here. Greatly appreciate it. If you don't mind just leaving the boards in place, we have taken photos, but we would be extra certain that we capture it. That would really bum us out if this all fell over. So feel free to grab snacks on the way out. we have upped our snack game intensely, since the first meeting, so, get some chocolate. Thank you all again.
Oh, I
Have a
didn't
good
see the
rest of your
chocolate.
evening. Yeah. Good job.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks, everybody, for a good conversation.
Hope to see you again.
I do as well.
Be there 25.
What year did you graduate?